Hey, and welcome to another episode of Grit in the Wild podcast. I'm your host, Adam Short,
And I'm your co host, Melissa Short.
and together we're here to talk about spiritual abuse, religious trauma, toxic faith, high control groups. And today we want to hone in on some specific subjects that have really influenced our lives in being a part of the hyper charismatic church. And that is really, if I could clarify and distill it, it's the effects and influence of Gnosticism
Yeah.
in our teachings, in our practices. I say our loosely because we don't really belong to the charismatic, hyper charismatic movement anymore, but we are very much talking about it. And a lot of this stuff is just outworkings of conversations we've had recently. So we've kind of just put out some bullet points here we want to go through today and unpack.
Yeah.
So I know you've got a lot to say, I've got a lot to say, but it's really like honing in on what is Gnosticism, not like a intellectual debate or treatise or anything like that, but really kind of getting practical as to how this stuff has made its way out and its fingers have touched very practical day-to-day life in hyper charismatic Christianity.
Yeah. And I mean, you would be better. Maybe you can just define, I'm wondering, for people who maybe don't know what
Okay.
Gnosticism is, just briefly, because,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and I'm not going to give a, you know, academic definition or anything, but basically the gist of Gnosticism, it was a philosophy, a belief system that existed during the time of Jesus, during the time that the New Testament was written in the Greek world. And basically, if you boil it down, what it means, what it seeks to say is anything that is of the spirit realm, right? So spiritual stuff is good, and anything that is of the natural, like something you can touch, you could see, you can smell, you can hear, that's bad. So spiritual good, physical bad.
And
And
would that
and
translate to like the body, right? Like essentially,
yeah,
like our bodies could be considered
your body,
bad because they're not essentially like
correct.
spiritual,
Your
right?
body
Yeah.
is a physical entity that exists that you can touch. And then by extension, it's not just that, but it is that in Gnosticism, the people that teach Gnosticism, including teachers in the hypercharismatic church, there's a belief that there is a secret knowledge.
Mm,
There's actually some hidden revelation that only the select few can access.
mm.
Okay. And so many of us who've been in these movements, when you hear that, you're like, oh yeah, the bells are going off. Like, oh yeah, we remember countless times of sitting under sermons where, there's this next latest and greatest revelation, this word from God that's right now. And even though I don't want to say that God can't do stuff like that, it was so emphasized that I think looking back now, it's actually a manifestation and a result of Gnosticism.
Yeah. Thanks for defining that.
So yeah, um, what do you want to
I don't even know
kick
where
us
to go
off
from here.
with?
Yeah, we had such a long conversation the other night about all this stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think I'm just thinking we watched a clip from someone in this movement that's pretty well known. And we don't want to name the person, but it was just interesting. It was a short clip, and it's funny, kind of like being so far removed from it and listening back to these few sentences. It sounds kind of like gobbledygook. It's like, what are you even saying? That doesn't even make sense now.
Yeah.
But just, one of the phrases that this person said was, "We can't be full, we must overflow." And I'm like, thinking in that statement, I'm like, don't those two things actually contradict each other?
Don't be what was it? You can't
Can't
be
be full, we must overflow.
you can't be full. You must overflow. So how is it possible to overflow if you aren't full?
Yeah,
That's my
exactly. That's what
question.
that's what I'm saying. Like, it's like, what does that even mean? Like, I just hear stuff like that, and I'm like, and then the other thing was, we're in danger if we're too self-aware, and you can become self-centered. Um, and I just think about that again, like, I work in mental and emotional health, study this stuff. And when I hear that now, like, I remember like years ago, I would have heard that statement and been like, oh, yeah, we don't want to be self centered. We can't focus on ourselves. Like, the word self
Yeah.
in Christianity is like, right? It's like a
It's a
no-no.
four-letter word.
Yeah. But I wanted to find something too. Like one thing that I've learned is like, when the Bible's talking about self, typically I think isn't it kind of translated towards like the word flesh, like when that word self is used?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Well, that's how it was taught to me. Like when you talk about self, it's flesh. And then when you talk about
Well,
um
there is a Greek word. Did study Greek in college, New Testament Greek, and but I forgot most of it. But there is a word in Greek for flesh, and it's sarx.
okay.
But I don't know that that's the same word you're thinking of. It
Okay.
might be. It might be. I don't know. I legitimately don't know as I sit here. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about, some of these phrases and just the idea that, like self is bad. Like to have a self is like in most of these movements and really across the major evangelical church, like to say anything about yourself or care about yourself is considered selfish or unspiritual or bad or
Yeah.
wrong. And it's so interesting because when, as I've studied mental and emotional health, you see that self is very, very important. Like without a self, meaning like living embodied, right? You're aware, you're self connected is such an important aspect to your mental and emotional health. And
Yeah.
it's actually when you're not self connected, it actually leads to a lot of relational problems, emotional struggles, right? Mental, like our
Yeah.
thought life, like being like out of balance. And so I just take issue now when I hear some of these
Yeah.
one-liners and I'm like, that's like against like how actually God created us and our biology. And so, yeah.
So let's talk about this clip some more.
Yeah.
So there was a thing in there about beauty. You wrote
Oh
it down,
yeah, it
right?
said, well, did I write it down? Um, I don't have that written down.
The gist of it was
Oh no, here it is. If
okay.
we don't feel beautiful, it's because we haven't beheld his beauty.
Okay. So, you know, and I just want to zoom out for a second before getting into that specifically. There are so many like one-liners or, 2-minute clips, 1-minute clips that circulate and you hear it, it's like the way it's said very breathy or very
Yeah.
almost like this slow cadence of speech. Um, it comes across very authoritative because the person speaking sounds very confident or very desperate for God or very whatever, fill in the blank. And so when you hear it, your brain kind of checks out a little bit. And
Yeah.
you're like, "Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing." Read that again. If
Yeah, if we don't feel beautiful, it's because we haven't beheld his beauty.
Okay, if you're just listening to music and somebody says that, you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so true." Except, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? You can't be beautiful unless if you don't feel beautiful, it's because you haven't seen his beauty. Like, really? Is that what the Bible says? Is that I mean, even for people who don't believe the Bible's true, put that aside for a minute, like, uh, what does that actually mean? It is unintelligible to me. I don't know what it means. And somebody might say, "Oh, it's because you're you're backslidden or something." I don't know. Uh, I don't know. But I legitimately struggle to know what it means. But then if you take a step forward and you try to analyze it and think through it, use your brain for a second, I still don't know what it means.
Well, and I hear
I don't
yeah,
know.
and I hear that, and I what I hear is, again, the deficiencies on us, right? It's this idea where it sounds really good, you know, "Oh, I need to just behold Jesus more," but one of the questions that I've wrestled with as I've gone through, right, like, my own trauma healing and, like, therapy and all that, is I'm like, "Okay, I actually feel like I do have Jesus." Like, I actually feel like he is there. He is somebody who has actually been there and supported me, and so
Mm,
one of the conclusions or thoughts that I've had through my process is like, I don't know that this is a spiritual problem because Jesus is here. Like he's actually like been an anchor for me. Like I actually do feel like I behold Jesus and I
mm,
still don't feel I don't always like myself and feel beautiful. So is it a spiritual problem? Is it a
yeah.
Jesus problem? Or is it just that maybe like I've experienced some stuff and I have wounds or I'm a human in this world and that's something we struggle with. And I think it's like you hear that and it sounds like something else you need to do to get to God. And really,
Right.
like, to me, that feels like religion, right? Like, it's another thing that I'm not doing right, another
Yeah.
standard that I'm not upholding, in my life spiritually to be closer to God, is what I hear when I hear statements like that.
Yeah, and there's so much emphasis on, I remember Bill talking about this at Bethel, like the deficiency is always on my
Yeah.
end of the equation, not God's, and that there's the thumbs up again, which we have no control over apparently. But getting into the whole spiritual problem,
Yeah.
the spiritual solutions and the spiritual problem, it's like what you said before we started recording, like, you go to the dentist to get a cavity filled, right? You don't go to the dentist to go get prayer.
Yeah, I'm like, is a
So
toothache a toothache inherently spiritual? Like, is it a spiritual problem? I mean, some people would say so. Some people
so
would say so, but
so let's tie this back to Gnosticism for a minute
yeah,
because and I could be, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the whole tying everything, your spiritual, I'm sorry, tying everything to a spiritual solution, I think is an outworking of Gnosticism, even
yeah,
if it's covertly, right? Okay. So let's think through that a minute. You gave a great example of going to the dentist, you got a cavity, your tooth hurts. Okay. Well, we know that cavities are caused by decay of the tooth
right.
and the root and all that kind of stuff, right? It actually has nothing to do with the spiritual problem
Yeah,
whatsoever. Somebody might say, well, you might have had a open door in your life and it led to the spirit of tooth decay that came in your mouth and they gave you a cavity. And there are people that believe that. Okay. And if that's what you believe, that's what you believe. But my point is, there is a bridge that happens between this spirit realm and this physical world. And this bridge, I think, is traced back to Gnosticism.
yeah.
And I want to take it a step further.
Go ahead.
Recently, and I want to give a shout out to Mike Winger, who is doing excellent work digging into what has going on at Bethel. As far as I know for a fact, he's researching. He wants to get these feathers tested at Bethel. That the feathers, the gems, the gold dust, all the stuff. Okay, he's going to have that stuff tested. He's interviewing people. He is looking into the miracles. He's looking into all these claims, and he's amassing this research. During the course of his research last week on Twitter, I came across this random post from Mike about it was a picture of a clock, an analog
Oh,
clock,
yeah.
okay? And he was like, "Can somebody please find out what brand clock this is?" And I'm like, he's like, "I'm looking into Bob Jones." And I'm like, "What is he what rabbit hole is he in now?" So I kind of went down the rabbit hole with him and in this thread, like there's hundreds of comments, all these people that are trying to help him find out what kind of clock this is. And I'm like, what does this clock have to do with Bob Jones? Well, it turns out there was a couple videos in the thread. Okay. And around or not around, right before Bob Jones died in February of 2014, he was in the hospital. Okay. His wife, Bonnie Jones, was there, and there was another man there, I forgot his name, who did a video about. There were two videos, one video done by Bonnie and one done by this other man, I forgot his name, about the clock thing that happened in Bob Jones's hospital room, um, like a week before he died. Okay, I believe they said it was February 6th, 2014. Okay, and you watch the video, and okay, here's what happened. It got to 11:55 p.m. and it was just normal clock was just moving along each minute, and then all of a sudden the minute hand started racing around like this. I showed it to you. You
Yeah,
remember?
yeah.
You're looking at me like I'm crazy
No,
or
no, no,
something.
I'm listening.
Okay, and it's going around like this. It wasn't like really, really fast, but it was like fast enough for it to be like, oh my gosh, this is not normal. And normally a clock doesn't move that fast. Like it was going like this. And they did have a video of this and it kept going. It went on until it had gone to 8 o'clock the next day. It was like 5 to midnight and it did this and it went on to 8 a.m. And then the thing slowed down again for briefly, and then it sped up again until eventually it got back to 12 and it got back to normal and it stopped doing that. And they had this whole spiritual explanation for this was like a way that God was breaking into the room to announce, and they had all these numbers that they were like the number 8 means this and then the number 2. And before by the time the video is done, you've got this whole quote unquote revelation that they have extracted from this experience. Well, it turns out people in the comments were like, y'all should have consulted a clock expert before you went out and on a limb and came up with this revelation, because they said that in hospitals like this or even other like buildings where there are tons of clocks, they have a syncing system. And so there's like a signal that is transmitted and the clocks all sync up. And sometimes what happens is the clock will start doing like this so it gets back on the right time. So my point is to bring all that in, my whole point is this. In the hyper-charismatic world, specifically in this situation, they took a very normal occurrence that's very explainable,
Yeah.
and they actually somebody found the manufacturer of the clock, and they verified that that's what these clocks do. There's actually an owner's manual. I went and looked at it. There's an owner's manual on how you get your clock to synchronize, and
Oh my
it does this
gosh.
stuff. So anyway, they took this very simple explanation and they made a spiritual story out of
Wow.
it,
Yeah.
and they jumped across this bridge that really wasn't there. And so we you and I lived in
Oh
this
my gosh. Yes.
day in and day out at Bethel, and I lived in it when I was in Kansas City and at MorningStar prior. Like everything means something. Every occurrence, every
Yes.
coincidence
Yeah.
means something. There's always going to be some spiritual revelation to extract from this coincidence that you experienced, or even if it's not a coincidence, some kind of weird occurrence, right?
Or you
And
like
I'm
get into like God speaking like all the time
yeah,
about certain things that maybe he's are just a are honestly a coincidence. I mean,
it
I
could
believe
very
there are
well.
I do believe God does speak through coincidental things.
I do
However,
too. I do too.
it was like the extreme, right? Like everything and
So like
yeah.
how do you know that how can we know that that was the spiritual message to be received from this clock situation? Like, who decides that that was actually what that was? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I don't know.
um, is it just because it was Bob Jones's? Is it just because it was Bob Jones in the hospital room that that had to be a spiritual like? So I just bring that up because this gets back to the spiritual versus the physical.
Yeah.
Like, you have a very ordinary event that happens, and then we somehow make this we create this bridge across it, and it becomes this grandiose spiritual revelation or experience that may actually have not been anything spiritual at all.
Oh my gosh, I just that made me think of an example. It kind of ties into like what you're saying, kind of into this whole spiritual warfare for excuse me, spiritual warfare stuff that gets way wacky too, which that might be something fun to kind of dig in. I'd love to hear what John Collins has to say about that.
Oh,
But
I
anyways,
already know. I've talked to him
oh
about it.
yeah.
Yeah,
But like here's what it made me think of. Before I started doing trauma work and working with a therapist, I used to think that the overwhelming emotions I experienced were spiritual warfare. I was convinced I was
I remember
having a
that.
spiritual attack and I would pray it away. I'm like, oh my gosh, the enemy is attacking me, that whole thing.
Yeah,
When I started doing therapy and started to learn to welcome my emotions and work with my emotions, I was like, oh, there's the thumbs up. I realized, oh my gosh, I think what I've been calling a quote unquote like the devil attacking me was just I actually didn't know how to be with the physical sensations in my body because that's where emotions show up. I didn't know
yeah.
how to be with the activation that was coming from my emotions. And since I've learned how to work with them, all of a sudden I feel less spiritual warfare.
Isn't that
It's
something?
crazy how that works. I was like, wow, like,
You
and it,
actually made room for it, and they
yeah,
were like they felt acknowledged, and now like, oh, okay, we can calm down a little bit because
yeah.
you
And I,
haven't tried to push me away or something.
exactly. And it's actually caused me to kind of question that theology. Like,
Mm,
wow, like a lot of the things that we're told are demonic or spiritual warfare, like maybe they're not actually that. And so, yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of going back to what you're saying. Like, we put so much spiritual meaning on things that maybe are not necessarily they don't need to have that. Like maybe
Right.
they just are a fact of life or a
Yeah.
coincidence or and again, I'm not saying that God doesn't work through those things,
Yeah,
but
me either. I know he does.
like again, going back to what we've been talking about in a lot of our episodes is like the critical thinking and like again, if you go to scripture, like go to scripture, like just really questioning and like, thinking through it critically. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
mean, you know, not everything has a deep
yeah.
spiritual meaning or a negative spiritual meaning or a demonic meaning or fill
Right.
in the blank,
Yeah, it could be neither nor. And I'm the first to say, I totally believe in God speaking random ways and stuff. Like
Yeah.
I totally believe in that,
Yes.
by the
Yeah.
way. Which is so which makes this all the more, for me personally, that makes this all the more difficult in my deconstruction journey, because now with the prophetic history at IHOP being totally debunked, even though there are still some people that say, well, they these parts of it actually did happen. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I've kind of made the decision just to say, okay, this prophetic history thing is garbage. Like
Yeah.
it's been a it was a I know the goalposts were constantly being moved. There were things that were sort of pushed off of the prophetic history over the years because things didn't happen that were prophesied. Blah blah blah. What I'm getting at is, as I'm deconstructing through my journey, it's hard because, like, now, if I hear, and which I wouldn't hear this anymore because I don't listen to this stuff anymore, like any prophetic words or stuff like that, like from a preacher, like I would totally get triggered. If I were to,
Yeah. It would
like,
be
if we were
hard to
watching that
listen to
right
that.
now, like
Yeah.
somebody's like, I feel like the Lord, blah blah blah, I'd be like, oh my God, turn that off. I can't listen to it
Yeah.
because I don't know who you are. Like, are you
Yeah.
really who you say you are up on that stage with that microphone? Are you making up? Is this a grandiose whoop-de-doo story you came up with? Or are you just totally deluded that the devil just gave you this? Or I don't know. I don't know what to do with it. So it's like, how do you? I don't know.
I
I
have
I
some
don't
thoughts.
know.
Yeah.
How do you? What do you hang on to? What do you not hang on to? Um, Somebody on a podcast recently, it might have been Blaze or John Mark Baker on and Jeff on the Minor Prophets. I can't remember. They were going into, I forgot his name in the Old Testament, where he actually prophesied something, but he ended up being like, he gave a, oh my gosh, I'm going to botch this story. Anyway, there's this Old Testament prophet, and the guy was heading home, and he said, "You got to go this way, and if you don't, then you're gonna you're gonna get eaten up by a bear." And he did. And it's like he prophesied the right thing, and it happened.
Yeah.
But he was prophesying and operating out of a dark, I think, out of a dark force or something. I don't know. This is this kind of stuff I think about.
Yeah. And
My
I don't
spare
know
t
about that. Like,
in my non-existent spare time. I'm trying to, like, make sense of this because you got people like Simon the sorcerer in the book of Acts who wanted to pay money to get these powers. And it's like, we got people who want to do that now. We got
yeah.
preachers who want to do that now. Oh, actually, they reversed it though. They want people to pay them money so they can cast their little spells on people.
Yeah, we have so much
Oh
confusion,
my
I feel
God.
like, with all of that because we've got, right, people that are questioning are any miracles, right, real at all? And then we've
Yeah.
got people that are like, what power are those miracles being done in? And, then people that are like, miracles exist. It's just, we've got the full spectrum. So I think that's just messy right now. But I want to say something about you said, like, how do you know? And like, I want to come back to this idea of self connection for a minute because I feel like it's really, really important. It's actually something that I like has been a big part of my own personal healing and something that I really like focus on in the work that I do. Um and it's important like being self-connected like right all these environments that we're in like toxic faith communities, high control groups, cults cause you to disconnect from yourself. And what happens when you're disconnected from yourself is you're not living embodied, like centered in your body, connected to your emotions. And our emotions, I talk about this every single episode because we're like, stop talking about emotions. But it's connected to this spiritual life. It's connected to all this stuff. Like being able to discern in your body when something is off is really important, or when something has resonance. There's this idea of resonance. And I think that happens spiritually, I think it happens emotionally, and it happens physically. We feel it in our bodies. And so when something connects with us, there is a resonance to it. It's like, yeah, like there's something about that that deeply connects with me. And the opposite is true. When something doesn't feel right, there's a sensation, there's a reaction
Yeah.
physically and emotionally. And in so many of these environments, we are taught to disconnect from self. So I think one of the most dangerous
Hmm.
teachings is disconnect from yourself and just be a spiritual
Oh,
robot.
yeah.
So you're like, oh, it's just all Jesus. But it's like, no, Jesus actually speaks through your body. Jesus speaks through your emotion. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Like embodied, like that is how the Lord speaks. It's essential to
Yeah.
our spiritual life. So if you're a
Yeah.
spirit, soul, and body, and you're told to ignore your emotions and you're told to ignore your, your body,
Right.
you're missing two-thirds of the equation. And so I think it's a really easy way when we're disconnected from ourselves, not grounded and centered in who we are, physically, emotionally, spiritually, it's so easy to be deceived. It's so easy to,
Yeah.
like not be discerning and not follow your intuition, like God given intuition
Yeah.
and God given wisdom that is, I think, built into us.
Hmm.
And I just don't think we teach that. I don't think we model that. We model, honestly, dissociation,
That's true.
which is just like a mental escape. Just
Yeah.
spiritualize it, ignore what you're feeling, ignore your intuition, ignore your
Yeah.
discernment, and just follow me over here.
Hmm.
And I just really take issue with that. And I feel
Yeah.
like
So do
so
I.
much of the work I do is helping people rebuild that. And in my own journey is like rebuilding the self connection. Like I was taught that self is so bad.
Right.
Like just rid yourself of you. But I don't think that's what Jesus meant. I think
Okay.
Jesus wants to inhabit who we are, right? And live in us and through us, not get us to go away.
Yeah. Oh man. Ooh, and that
Anyways,
reminds me of
rant.
another kind of subject we were talking about the other night around humanity
Yeah.
and agency.
Yes.
Okay. And then how those intersect with suffering.
Yeah. Talk about
Okay.
that. Like, what did you, yeah, your
Well, and
thoughts?
I'm trying to remember kind of everything we talked about, but it occurred to me that Jesus himself, the Son of God and man, he was man and God. The night before he died, he was literally in the Garden of Gethsemane in agony over it. Like, if there's any way, and we read this in the Bible, like, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. And we're like, King James English. It's
Yeah.
like, do you really actually know what that means?
Yeah.
It's like, can I get out of this? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
is there any way that
Yep.
I can accomplish my mission and not have to go through it?
Yeah. That's
Go through
essentially what he
with
was saying.
this.
Yep.
Okay. So, like, up to the point where he sweat blood. And you talk about body, like manifestation of
Mm-hmm.
agony in your body
Yeah.
and how that actually showed up in his body. He bled, he literally sweat blood out, right? Is what the Bible said. What I'm getting at is there was a deep wrestle. Here we have a man who did not sin at all while he was on earth.
Yeah.
He experienced everything that we ever will and have on this earth, whether it be suffering, joy, and everything in between, loss, all of it.
Grief. Yeah. So much.
Every
Yeah. Everything.
last bit of it. And yet he was here in the garden wanting, if there's any possible way that I can get through this without having to go die on that tree, let me do that. But then after all that, he made the decision to do it. Nobody forced him. No, it was not forced upon him at all.
Yeah.
Okay, and let me just talk about why I think that's so important.
Yes.
It is the agency
Mm.
of a human. Okay, we came from movements where the leaders put their boot heel on our neck.
Mm.
And even though it was not physically they stepped on our neck, it was a unidirectional um this is the doctrine. This is the practice. This is what you do. And and by the way, at Bethel, that practice and that doctrine did not include suffering either.
Not at all. No.
So when it comes to a human having agency, you were talking about like, um, there's you can't just be bobbling around like a formless spiritual being. Like we actually have a human body here. We have human experience. There are decisions we make. There's agency that happens. And the core of where abuse happens spiritually is around agency
Absolutely. Yeah.
because the person who is in authority, and I will say this from my own experience. I have experienced this, the utter devastation that happens when a spiritual leader usurps your agency as a human and steps on that and crushes your spirit and soul. Now, how does that relate to anything I just said about Jesus? It relates because Jesus did not have somebody putting their boot heel on him to do this. He made his free decision to do it.
Yeah.
God didn't exert his will upon him to do that, right? I don't believe he did.
No.
I believe that Jesus had the full freedom to not go through with this if he chose not to.
Right.
What
Yeah.
would have happened if he had not? I don't know. We'd be in a world of hurt, I think.
Yeah. Who knows?
But did that make sense? Like
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm trying to I'm trying to like get these thoughts out of how the agency and the suffering.
Well, yeah.
And then but also, like, how the spiritual abuse interfaces into that. It's almost like a T where you with when 2 roads come together, you've got this north to south road going right here, and then you've got a T right here, and the road ends. The spiritual abuse comes at the T, and it goes further, and it pierces you down to the very core of who you are as a human, and then what you're left with is the wreckage. You're left with the inability to even know how to make a decision spiritually anymore.
Well,
You're
yeah.
derailed. I believe that is what whoever it was that said this in the New Testament, like, many people's faith has been shipwrecked. I
Yeah.
think that is what this is.
Well, yeah, and I wanna yeah, that was so good. Yeah, Jesus, yeah, he chose to do it out of his own agency. That was what was powerful. No one made him. He chose to.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we like to look at stuff like that as like, people pleasing. Like, well, Jesus didn't go like, well, I really should. Maybe I should. I feel bad if I don't. It was like, no, like he took up his agency, right? And I think I have so much to say about that. But yeah,
Yeah.
he made a choice. He chose suffering. He made a choice, a powerful choice to do that. Yeah, and I think I'm relating that back to us. Like
Mhm.
Jesus never takes away our choice. And what you're saying about
Yeah.
the spiritual abuse, where choice is absent, harm always happens.
Ooh,
When you take away people's choices,
isn't
harm
that the
will
truth?
ensue. You
Yeah.
have to have free will. God never takes away our free will. He never takes away our choice. That is dignity bestowed on us. It is
Bestowed.
humanizing to give people the choice. I think
Yeah.
about, how we discipline our son. Like, one of the things we do is we do like the love and logic, like we give him a choice. You know,
We try to.
we try to. It doesn't always work. But I think about that. Like, we're like, yeah, well, if you do that, here's the consequence. But you can choose to listen or not listen. But if you don't listen, like this is gonna be the consequence.
Mhm.
He has the free will. We're trying to encourage him in making choices and experiencing, right?
Yeah.
Good and bad consequences of that choice. But yeah, yes, in spiritually abusive environments, and it's so subtle. It's not like anyone says you don't get to choose. It's so mixed in the yeast, right? It's all the subtle ways, like the culture of honor that keeps you
Mm.
silent. That takes away your choice.
Mhm.
Like this is what we believe. Again, it's so subtle. Yeah, oh yeah, this is what we believe, or those othering people, like they don't have the revelation that we have.
Right.
That's a subtle way that your choices get taken away from you because you're like, oh well, this is how we believe over here, or
Yeah, and the other people are bad or uninformed or not as good as you.
right, or guilt messages about money, like, if you sow, you're gonna get this. Like, I'm not saying that that's taking your choice, but there's those little things that get worked in that take away your choice. There was something else you said about all of that, and I can't remember what it
Was it about
was.
agency and, like, suffering and agency and how those intersect with, spiritual abuse? Or
I don't know now, but
okay.
yeah, it was really good. Like, oh, here's what it made me think of when you were talking about Jesus, right? The Son of God. he's in the garden, he's the sweating, the tears of blood. There's actually a physical condition. I looked it up. Like there's a name for it. Like it's
Mm,
actually a condition. And it's utter and absolute distress.
mm.
So when we like to say, we look at, oh, Jesus was sinless. Okay, think he was anxious. He was overwhelmed to the point of sweating
But
blood.
yet, oh my gosh, we
Oh,
got
we have balloons.
balloons.
Okay.
Where did the
Yay.
balloons come from? I have
I
no
don't know.
idea. That's weird.
It's
So,
spiritual. Just
yeah,
kidding.
that's interesting though. You mentioned that, like, okay, yeah, that's like anxiety times a million,
Like times a
agony
million.
times a million, but yet he didn't sin. So, like, where did we get the idea that being anxious is a sin?
That's what I'm talking
I
about.
mean,
Yeah,
okay, people might say, well, it does say don't be anxious about anything, but in all things by prayer and thanksgiving, make a request be known to God, and the peace of the God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So maybe they say, oh, that's where they're pointing to, but I think you're right. Like, I mean, that is the
cool.
ultimate anxiety slash
Yeah.
agony, but yet he didn't sin.
I was gonna say another thing you said too, like if you think about if God said, if Jesus said to God, like, can you do it another way, dude? Can we like, is there any other way I can get around this?
Hmm.
I think about so many messages and I see it all the time, little like posts on social media about like obey God and don't ask questions and quickly obey. I'm like, where does that come
It's like
from?
the
Like,
drill. It's like a drill
yeah,
sergeant.
it's like
Like,
we make up stuff. Like we make up this religion of Christianity and we put all this shame and guilt on people. And I'm like, look at the life of Jesus, okay? Like look at him. Like he was so human. The more I look at Jesus through the lens of humanity, his humanness, I see it. It's there. He
mm,
was totally human. I mean, yes, he was God and whatever, but like he was a human and we are too. And this idea, again, what we're talking about, the Gnosticism, spirit good,
yeah,
person bad, it dehumanizes us. Like you get to be a human. We get to be humans in this world. And I think the message is, yeah, that your humanness is bad and
yeah,
only the spirit is good. And it does harm to us and it
mm,
creates so much shame that we live out of because we feel like everything needs to be spiritual instead of going like, what's not spiritual about feeling my emotions or what's not spiritual about paying attention to my body or you know what I'm
or
saying?
going to the
Or
doctor.
going to the doctor or
Yeah,
whatever it
like
is.
the shame. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of shame in some circles around going to the
Oh my
doctor,
gosh. Yeah.
right? Because it's like, oh, even if nobody comes out and says it directly, like, oh, they have a lack of faith because they
Yeah.
don't trust
Yeah.
God for their healing. But yeah, I mean, can it not be both?
Yeah. That's such a good point. Yeah.
I mean, shoot, I'll pray for healing, but I'm gonna go to the doctor too, by the way.
Yeah.
You
I
know what I mean?
know. I was just telling someone too. I'm like, yeah, spirit, soul, and body, like address all realms, right? Pray about it, feel your emotions, connect with your body, take care of your body. Like, why not all three?
Yeah.
Why not approach it from every realm? Like, why is it only spiritual? That's what we're taught, especially in the charismatic movement.
Because
Yeah.
like I said, back to Gnosticism, I think it's that's one of the big reasons. And I also think that when you combine the Gnosticistic, I don't know if that's a word,
Are you
Gnostic,
trying to say narcissistic?
narcissist. Oh, maybe we could coin a new word.
No.
Narcissist.
Oh my
a
God.
nos
Ay,
a
ay,
narcissistic narcissist. Anyway, when you take if you've got influence of Gnosticism already, and then you mix with that like a hyper focus on the spirit realm, it's like, I mean, it's probably going to be Gnosticism on steroids.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
I feel like there's more to say with that, but
yeah,
like,
I'm just looking at the
yeah, I'm looking
stuff
at
we
our
wrote
notes
down.
too. Um, yeah, what else did we have to say about that? I feel like there was stuff I wanted to say about, I don't know if that's getting off track, just about attachment. I was thinking back to the clip we watched that we mentioned in the beginning. Just,
Yeah,
I think, I don't know if you guys have ever studied or looked into attachment theory. I highly recommend it. It is so fascinating. Um, Diane Poole Heller is a great person to look into, and she actually has a quiz you can take. So your attachment is basically how you attach to your caregivers or parents during your formative years, and it actually wires you for all your future relationships for life. And I know you know that we talk about that.
Mhm.
The thing with attachment is it can be healed, right? So, like, if you heal and engage your story and understand those things, like, there's healing that can happen.
Yeah.
But there's four main attachment styles. So there's secure attachment, which is the ideal, and that the idea of secure attachment is kind of feeling felt, seen, and heard and known, like a secure base that you come back to, right?
Mhm.
Like you feel safe to be yourself. You know your needs are going to be met. You know your emotions are going to be validated. And that is like the ideal. They've studied this that like for outcomes, for brain development for children, for they've followed, children who are raised with secure attachment all the way into their adulthood, and they have healthier relationships and create, secure attachments in their marriage.
Yeah.
And then there's anxious attachment, which is like, oh, are you okay with me? Kind of like that type of thing. Like you feel very anxious in your attachments. There's avoidant, where emotions and feelings feel very threatening to you. Like, oh my gosh, like you clam up when people show too much emotion.
Mm.
And then there's disorganized, which is very few have that. It would come from like a very severe traumatic kind of childhood or abusive childhood where attachment or relationship connection feels like you want it, but you move away. Like
Mm.
it's like you want to, but you can't.
Like on or off kind of
Yes.
thing.
And so it's very, very interesting. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because it translates to our relationship with God and
Mm.
how we
Wow. Okay.
teach how
I haven't
we
thought about that.
portray God to people in the church.
Hmm.
And God is supposed to be our secure attachment, right? He is supposed to be this loving, unconditional love, secure person, a secure base for us to come back. But
Hmm.
when we teach things like,
Yeah.
um, if you don't feel beautiful, it's because you're not beholding his beauty. Imagine a
Ugh.
secure, loving
Yeah.
parent telling their
No.
child to that. Well, if you don't feel loved, it's because you're not holding my
I
love.
mean, yeah,
How ridiculous is that?
when you put it that way, that sounds very mean.
Yeah,
It
it's kind
sounds
of abusive,
very
right?
uh very very standoffish, very I don't want to tick you off
Yes, and so
because hang on, let me get this out.
sorry.
It's like I mean, I'm just imagining if if I were a kid and I said that to my parent, I probably would go to the other room or not want to talk to him, or I'd be scared of him.
Yeah,
Come behold my beauty. It's like, what? Do we even say behold?
I know.
Like, I don't think I say that word. I don't say behold.
Yeah.
I don't like that word. The only time I say behold is in Southern. Lo and behold, we say it in our Southern dialect. You know, you
Behold.
listen to me all the
I
time,
do. I love your
me talking
Southern.
like I do.
I love your Southern. And people tell me that I'm from California. And when I go back to visit, people tell me, oh, you have an accent. Like, really? Okay.
Well, guess what? So does everybody
Yeah.
else.
Yes, you've told me that. I used to not think I had an accent. Oh, there's my
There's the
phone.
phone.
Sorry. Yeah, so back to the attachment for a minute. Like we portray God as not being the secure attachment.
I
We
okay.
portray him as an anxious God or disorganized. Come close, move far away. Go ahead. Yes.
I'm like really
Yes,
interested in
student.
this concept right here.
Yeah.
You never told me this.
I have it.
I mean, maybe you have. I maybe it just went over my head or something. But that's cool. Like I want to. I don't know. It's hard for me to think about that on the one hand because I've told her this for y'all's benefit who are watching. Like, I feel like I'm just a regular guy walking around, and you've told me I'm a secure attachment, right? Is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah, you are. You taken the test. Yeah.
But what's interesting is I don't feel that way with God.
Yeah.
I don't feel securely attached to God. I feel like I'm just a regular guy. There are a lot of people hanging around Earth that need
Mhm.
help, they have needs, and I don't say that to, like, rattle myself, I'm just being honest, that's how I feel, like, I mean, I'm one of millions and billions of people walking around, and I frankly feel like God's busy,
Mhm.
and so, it's interesting there's a stink bug up there on the window. It's interesting because I don't know what to do with that, like, you're you're
I already my coaching practitioner parts are wanting to come and help you
So
right now. So I'm gonna
here's what we do off cameras. I just let her fix my problems.
no, you don't need fixing. Nobody needs fixing.
Well,
Really, nobody
okay.
needs fixing. You don't
All
need
right.
fixing.
Okay.
No, but I mean, we've talked about that. Some of that, and if you're listening, like some of the ways that we view God, the lenses, all have lenses through
Yeah.
which we view God, and that's for a lot of different reasons. But some of it's from our attachment from our parents. Unfortunately, it just is. We tend to view God through the lens of how we had maybe attached to our parents. And in your case, you
Yeah,
had
but I have
secure
secure,
attachment
yeah.
and trauma, right? Spiritual, all the spiritual abuse and
Yeah.
trauma.
It's
Again, the
probably got some impact.
communities we've been part of. That was the other thing. I am chatty Cathy tonight, y'all. Whoa.
I can barely get a word in.
I'm so sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
you're fine. Go ahead. You're gonna fix my problem.
No, I'm not gonna fix your problem. But I remember the other thing that we wanted to talk about.
Wait, but you didn't finish all that.
It's related
You're
to that.
about to finish your whole thing about spiritual abuse and how that impacts your secure attachment with God. What was the punchline?
No, just yeah, like it was going back to what you and I talked about the other night about okay, so I don't remember where it is in the Bible. Is it
It's in
Corinthians?
the book of Deuteronomy or Jericho.
So we're kind of all over the place tonight, if you can't tell. Um, but so when Jesus said, or Paul, I think it was in Corinthians, was talking about like Jesus is the head of the church, right? And then like all of us are the body. Remember we were talking about
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that?
Okay, yeah. That all that
So
stuff.
like
Yeah.
there's a head and then we're the body. Like we are the physical manifestation of Christ's body as the
Hmm.
church. And why that is important and relating it back to this is we were talking about how when we experience harm from somebody in the church, and people like to say, well, God didn't do that to you. It wasn't Jesus.
Oh gosh,
And
here it
how you
comes.
like people want to get a pass, right? We like want to pass it off on well, those are people, it wasn't God. I'm like, no, like we're actually the representation of God. So if you think about that, if Jesus is the head and we, the church, is the body, when people harm us, it's directly connected to our connection to God, whether we like it or
Yeah,
not. Listen,
that's true.
cognitively, I can know, okay, God, like I might be able to say, I know that wasn't you that did that. It was this person.
Yeah.
But because the body of Christ, the church, is supposed to be the representation of Christ, it has an effect on us. It absolutely does. And I don't think, as much as we want to separate it, I think it takes a lot of time and healing to be able to come to that place. And I think it's very individual.
Yeah.
I think everyone's on their own journey with that. And I deeply respect that. But I think that like to get a pass and say, "Oh, no, 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 no," like there's an impact. What are
Well,
your thoughts on that?
oh my gosh, so much. I mean, nice cop out, first of all.
Right.
Okay. And just add it to the long list of cop outs that continue to pile up from these guys on stage with the mic, right? Who, first of all, either they're silent about all the abuse going on.
Yeah.
Secondly, they gaslight everybody who
Oh,
has been abused. Third, um, it was their fault.
the victim's
It was the
fault. Yeah.
victim's fault. Fill in the blank as to what the reason is. You know, they've got a million reasons to why it's their fault. So, but to take it a step further, like with the whole body of Christ versus God
Yeah.
way up here, up high. I mean, I'm thinking about what I told you the other night. Okay, here's the thing
Oh,
though.
yeah. Okay.
This is what I think about this thinking is when you got a head and you got a body. And everybody, the Bible says, should I say this? I'm gonna say
Maybe not the version that you said. Maybe you could say a different version of it.
I might say the version I was
Oh
saying
Lord.
just because it's important. Okay. I think it's
Okay.
important.
We might lose some followers
Um,
after that.
we have like 10. So okay, just walk with me for a minute. You have a head and you have a body. It
Yeah.
says Jesus is the head, and then the rest of the body, like you got the hands, the feet, everything else. Well, if the head, or I mean, if the body itches somewhere, the head's not going to itch it. I can't stick my head where I need to itch. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. It was a
Like,
good point.
it's going to be like, if I need to scratch my arm, I'm going to scratch my arm right here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stick my head down here and do it like this. So to me, that's what I thought of when you
Yeah.
said that.
It was a
It
good,
was
yeah.
like, it's like this dumb way of thinking of that whole explanation of, "Oh, no, it's just the spiritual, like, God's people didn't do that to you." Yes, they did. They did.
Yeah.
They actually did, by the way. And that actually is, to me, like, fundamental gaslighting.
Yeah.
Like, you actually are separating, I don't know, you're separating what happened from what happened.
Yeah, they're not separate. I think that's the thing is like God's people harmed you and it harmed your relationship with God. It had an impact on how you view God because those people represented God to you.
Yeah, but it's even more than that. It's like they did represent God, but they're saying they're like copping out. They're like, "Peace out. I didn't do that.
Exactly.
We didn't do
Yes.
this."
Yes.
Except they did. And you can't just take the head, which is Jesus up here, the spiritual, so to speak, and scratch your arm if it itches. It takes another body part, my fingers, to scratch it.
Yeah.
If a mosquito bit my arm,
Yeah.
does that make sense? It makes sense to me
Yeah, I think I'm tracking with
when
you.
I say it, but it probably doesn't make sense. I don't know if it makes sense, but anyway,
Yeah.
whatever. That's what I
No,
thought of.
no, I'm tracking with you. It's like, yeah, like we don't it sounds good to just say like, "Oh, it wasn't God and it was just the people," or people like, like you said, people
Yeah,
gaslight you. It's not that big of a deal. I'm like, "Well, no, but you are supposed to be the reflection of God to me in the world, so it does matter and it does impact how we trust God and different things." Like it has there's healing that has to take place with that. And I think to discount that is just unfair. I don't
mhm,
know. It's real. It's a real thing.
very real. It reminds me of the Brian Regan episode, the comedian.
Yeah, but what about Brian Regan?
Well,
I'm trying to
the
like,
one where he's driving himself to the ER and
oh yes. Oh
he
my
just
gosh.
he goes into the ER and they ask him what seems to be the problem. And he's like, "Well, it seems that everything on my insides wants to be on my outsides, but I'm no doctor."
Yeah.
It's like, but that's a really comical way of illustrating, like, you have another person standing there calling into question your own experience.
Yeah.
And you're like, "No, actually, everything on my insides wants to be on my outsides because I'm in so much pain because of what y'all did to me.
Yeah.
So don't tell me it didn't happen.
Yeah. It's
Don't 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 even insinuate that what I'm experiencing is even 1 degree less than what it is."
and that's going back to this. It causes us to self-connect. When people in the church, when you're like, I was hurt, and they're like, oh yeah, I've got
Church
my
hurt.
feelings at hurt are at church too. And yeah, dismiss it as church hurt when you're like, I actually have PTSD and like post-traumatic stress. It's it causes you to self-connect, doubt yourself, not trust yourself. So you don't actually even believe what happened.
Yeah, you
And you're like,
mhm.
oh, the deficiencies on my end. I must be the problem. It's me. I haven't done something right.
Yeah.
And again, it just creates more disconnection in your life. It actually doesn't bring you closer to God either. Because the more disconnected and bad you feel about yourself, if the people right in your the church are telling you the problem's wrong with it's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
how does that bring you closer to God? How does that make you
I
want
don't
to connect with
I don't know.
the
I don't
God
think it
who's supposed
does.
to love you? I don't think it does. I
I don't
think
think.
it creates more shame for
Well,
us.
how did look at how Jesus, look at the people, the what they call the low dregs of society that he came across through his
Yeah.
life, right? Like the woman at the well or the woman caught. Okay, I just want to say this. The woman caught in the act of adultery, by the way. I mean, we should just translate the Bible in plain English. We know what actually that is, right? I
Yeah.
mean, just think, I'm not going to say it, but that's what that is, right? And so Jesus, my point is Jesus came across people like this all the time in his ministry while on earth, and look at how he treated them.
Yeah.
He definitely did not, he didn't walk up to the woman at the well. Didn't he tell her, he told her, did he ask her, "Woman, where's your husband?"
The woman at the well. Yeah, I don't think he said it like that, but
Well,
I
no,
think we like people like to preach like
yeah,
that, but
yeah, I mean, I don't mean in that tone. I just mean like he asked her, and then I think she said, didn't she say, "I have had
5,
5
yeah.
husbands," or something? And then he gave her this. He basically read her mail.
Yeah.
He connected with her at the most profound, deep level. Okay. He did not shame her.
No.
He did not punish her, or he didn't say, "Oh, you should be beholding me more." I mean,
Exactly. You know what? Yeah.
it sounds like, if you put it into those terms, it sounds like telling somebody, "Oh, you should just behold me more." That sounds so
It
narcissistic.
really oh my gosh, when you put it that way, it does. I could never that would be horrible if somebody said that.
Like, what if Jesus told her that? I mean, that'd be weird. I mean, I imagine she probably wouldn't wanna follow him if he told her that,
No. He
you know?
met the need. That's what I was thinking. Anytime he encountered somebody, he always met the need, whether it was a physical need, an emotional need, um, a practical need, right? The fish and loaves. He like with the woman at the well, there was shame, I could imagine, from
Yeah.
like all of that. He met the emotional need, told her, I'll give you like water that you'll never thirst
Right,
again.
yeah.
Like he met that was like a soul need. And like I just love that, like, he always met the need, whenever he encountered somebody. And again, that's going back to humanness and humanity. Like, we have needs.
Yeah.
We're not just this spiritual thing. Like, he could have just said, take
This blob.
salvation and go on your way. Like, no, he actually cared. Like,
Mm,
he interacted with people in a dignified way.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, going back to the Gnosticism and this the spiritualizing everything, it can be dehumanizing oddly.
Yeah.
The message that's supposed to be, right, the
Yeah.
most humanizing and the most loving can become
Yes.
this tool that is used to, yeah, just I don't know,
Yeah, it's like
you know?
stripping people of their humanity.
Yes, yeah.
We've both seen that. I know I've seen that in
Yeah.
various flavors of the hyper-charismatic movement, and yeah,
And I've probably participated in that. Like I think unintentionally, like I just want to acknowledge that like back when I was there, like I didn't have much empathy at that time in my life because I hadn't been through really like as a Christian really anything hard or I don't know, I just kind of lived in that pie in the sky, yeah,
right.
over spiritualizing everything. I remember people would come to me and share like things at that time that they were struggling with and I would just always had a spiritual answer. I would bypass a lot of people
Mhm.
unintentionally and I feel sad about that now. But, I didn't know then what I know now, and
Yeah,
we're all on a journey, um,
100%.
you know, but
Yeah.
I guess when you're on the other end of that, right? When you've
When you've had
experienced
some loss
when
and
you're the one that's
yeah,
in need, when you're the one that feels like the least of these, which
right.
we have often felt that, like, very much in the past,
Yeah,
I mean, through our stuff that we've been through, like, you
right.
really understand the need of, like, that compassionate, you know
Mhm.
person, the compassionate care.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from a deep well of your own pain, and so you're able to identify with other people, I think.
Yeah.
Like,
I
you
think
really
that's the
are, like,
ideal. Yeah.
and yeah. So,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do from here, but, that was a good talk.
Yeah, I just think
That was
like
good.
embracing your humanity, like yes, like we're spiritual beings, but we're human beings too.
Mm.
And
We're not human doings.
yeah, like you get to be human and I think over spiritualizing everything, like not everything's a spiritual problem.
Yeah,
Maybe it's an emotional problem. Maybe it's a skill you need to learn in relationships. Maybe it's,
a
you
food
know,
allergy.
a food yeah. Maybe it's, I don't know, something really practical. Like there's so much I've learned that's
Yeah,
like, "Oh my gosh, it was just something practical I needed."
right.
Not this big you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Not all this spiritual stuff. It wasn't spiritual warfare. It was I just needed to feel my emotions or, you know,
yeah.
just
Yeah, down to,
normal.
like, real small stuff like, blue light before you go to sleep can make your brain, like, all amped,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like blue light on your phone or whatever, computer.
It just made me okay, like, I know we're getting ready to, like, end, but this was, like, a funny example of, like, the ridiculousness. Do you remember this person that we were told about years ago that actually had on their website that, like, deodorant was somehow, like, demonic somehow? There was, like,
No,
some origin
I didn't
or,
I
like,
don't remember that.
like, swirls where, like, there was something, like, it just
Swirls?
yeah,
Like a
like
swirl thing?
like, any kind of swirl, like, just
Huh.
So ridiculous.
Okay.
I'm gonna just think about some of these
Yeah. I
that
mean,
just came to
hey,
mind. And like,
there's no lack of examples of this insanity
yeah.
everywhere.
Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that,
Yeah, how do we land the ship? Did we get
I
all
don't
of our
know. Let me
notes?
see. Did we talk about? I think we covered kind of what we're wanting to talk about.
Oh, you said something. I want like this. You can I read what you said?
Sure.
He said this when we made notes the other night, but you said the one-liners like with our faith. Do you want to
Oh,
read talk about that for a second as we
yeah,
close?
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right.
It was so
Yeah,
good.
so I guess, I don't know, we were talking about, there are so many different, you know, captions and whatnot that come through social, like these nice sounding one-liners, these spiritual one-liner maxims, right? Which I guess if you read these one-liners, your life will be changed forever, instantly. It's like a Mick miracle or whatever. But anyway, what came to my mind was, is the more we like reduce our faith to the one liners, the more we are giving ourselves to dogmatism,
Yeah.
because we make these blanket statements, these stereotypical statements, kind of like one of the ones we read
Yeah, I was gonna say
earlier,
that. Yeah, that beauty
the
behold,
beauty
and
thing.
that's a one-liner that we're
Okay,
talking about.
like you're reducing down your faith to one sentence, and you actually think that you have certainty about that.
Yes, yeah.
And in your certainty, you have abandoned mystery,
Hmm.
right? And the older I get, the more I don't know, the more stuff goes into my mystery box. My mystery box is about dang near ready to blow up. It's so full. And so I think that the one liners remove the mystery of faith.
Hmm.
Faith doesn't mean you know all the answers.
Yeah, so good.
I mean, people criticize Peter for, like, he's stepping out of the boat and falling in the water because he's doubting, and everybody's giving him a bad rap. It's like, hey, wait a minute. The dude actually stepped out of the boat and tried to walk on water.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Let's give
I
him some
think
credit.
I think that's probably faith there.
Yeah.
But oh, I know what it was, right quick. It was Thomas. We were talking about Thomas.
Yeah, we talked
Remember?
about that last time too, I
Oh yeah,
think.
we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did.
But remember, no, it was not just Thomas, it was also Luke. Luke was a doctor.
Yeah.
Matthew was a like he worked for the IRS, okay, of Israel back then. And I'm a tax accountant, so I can understand how he might have felt. Um, but so, oh, down, there's a down thumb for the
Oh.
IRS. So anyway, you got a doctor and you have um an accountant
Yeah.
that are very evidentiary based, very scientific, very numerical, very empirical, very I can verify everything. Okay. Well, guess who went and wrote the book of Acts? Luke, a doctor, the same guy. And you better believe he wanted to verify the
Yeah.
miracles. So I don't know why I got on that. It had to do with the faith, but like it's okay to want to verify stuff. It's okay to want to like to have this stuff in mystery and intention, and like we don't know the
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
I think that was what I was trying to
Yeah.
say.
And I was just
So
gonna add like that one last little part about the nervous system, like your autonomic nervous system. That's another cool thing if you ever want to study it. Is always scanning for safety or danger. And it's like your brain is wired towards safety. And so I think uncertainty feels uncomfortable and can be perceived as dangerous to your brain. And so it's hard to live in that place. But
yeah.
um that is a good place to be in, right? Like not having
It's
all
it
the
is it
answers,
is a good
and
place, but it's also
it's
uncomfortable.
very
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
because we
Really.
do want to know.
We do want
We're
certainty.
curious. We're
Yeah.
naturally curious. But yeah,
Yeah. That was a lot.
okay. It was good though. A lot of good stuff to kind of kick around and try to make sense of. So hopefully y'all found this helpful, and thought provoking. But as always, let us know your thoughts and comments. Our email is gritinthewild@gmail.com, all one word, or you can just hit us up in the comments here. And as always, thanks for watching. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.